So the third part is focusing on the subject of CA failures and what can we do about them, and in particular, the approach of certificate transparency. Okay, let me explain. Oh, and just reminders that all of this stuff is written. If you want to read it, it's write-up. So it's basically all of it is written in this chapter, which you can get from a website or from a ResearchGate. So if you want more details. Okay. So first day we discussed introduction to the subject in X509 in general. Yesterday we discussed revocations basically, and today CA failures and certificate transparency. So we discussed that there are all these CA failures, right, that we already discussed. And the question is, how do we defend against them? One approach will be to use name constraints to limit the risk. So, for example, why should a CA in England should be able to define websites in Japan, right? So maybe we shouldn't have this ability of a CA of one country to define websites of a different country. Now, it sounds natural, but actually it's completely quite impractical, in particular because the internet has all these global top-level domains like .com. So which country will own .com and the other top-level domains? And even if we talk about country levels, then it's not completely clear that we actually want this kind of separation of CAs to different countries, because many services in the internet are global services. Why shouldn't CAs be global services? So that approach does not seem to have any chance. So there are other more technical approaches. The first is to do, actually, I guess the two of them are to do what we call key pinning, where the beginning was approaches of doing static key pinning. That is, browser simply had this kind of public keys burnt into the browser, and the browser knew for very particular domains what would be the legitimate public key or certificate. And that has been very useful. In particular, that allowed Google in Iran to detect when there was abuse of the of a certificate of Google. There was in a rogue certificate for Google issued by signed by DigiNotar, a certificate authority that is subsequently actually taken out of business. And they detected it by having these static key pinnings, namely the browser Chrome knew that this cannot be the correct, or at least it is unlikely to be the correct public key for Google. It used some mechanism to notify Google about it, and then they learned about this attack. Static key pinning is, however, very limited. How do you change keys? How do you decide which keys to preload? How do you even apply it to more general than just, just the browser manufacturer? How do you apply it to many different web domains? It's very, very limited. But it could be extended. And indeed, there have been a standard attempting to do this called HTTP public key pinning, HPKP. And the idea of this standard is that the server essentially tells the browser, I always use this public key, or I always use this certificate or certificate chain. And then the client can simply remember this. And like to essentially do this key pinning approach, the client can remember this and implement, therefore, namely, if it ever receives a certificate with a different public key or a different certificate in general, then it would be able to refuse the connection, it will be able to report this, and so on. However, the HPKP seems to be not really gaining in popularity, and there are some serious concerns with it. In particular, what happens if I lose the key? I need to, some failures happens and I cannot use the key anymore. What happens if the key is exposed? I need to change the key, right? I need to recover my security or even recover my connectivity if the key is completely lost. And I can get a new certificate, but if I have this this HPKP, then the browser thinks this is an incorrect certificate or incorrect new public key. So therefore, it seems that this is kind of dying out, HPKP. I just want to mention that in my opinion, there should have been a variant of HPKP which could have been very good, which is CA pinning, where the domain owner would say essentially, if you get any certificate for my domain, it must come from one of the following, 2, 3, 4 CAs, not from any arbitrary CA. And that could have been a way to deal with this big problem of having, hundreds of CAs, some of them completely irrelevant. So a website or a domain owner could determine the specific CAs which it can use, even, as a backup, so it could have a shorter list of CAs. So that could have been a part of HPKP, and maybe that part could have lived, but currently it's not, and currently HPKP seems to be phasing out. So what can we do? Okay, well, one approach which is definitely taking on, and that will be our main topic for today, is certificate transparency. That's a proposal from Google, and the goal of this proposal is very simple. Having accountability, but real accountability. What do I mean by real accountability? Well, accountability is a property of basic public key, simply by the fact that certificates are signed, right? So if I receive a rogue certificate, I know which CA has signed this rogue certificate because it is signed, so I can identify the rogue CA and I can hold them accountable, right? That is what happened with DigiNotar. That's how Google knew that DigiNotar has been compromised or has issued the certificate because it was signed by DigiNotar. So that was easy to know. However, that requires us to get this rogue certificate identified. And since a rogue certificate is maybe used only against some naive users and so on, they may not be able to know this. That's why we need the certificates in the first place, right? So the certificate transparency approach says whenever you use a certificate, that certificate cannot be used only and exposed only to that particular user. If you want to expose the certificate to use it against one user, it must be also available for public verification, for monitoring by everybody, including the real domain owners. If you got a certificate for a domain you don't own, the real domain owners can be aware of this because this is public, this is visible to everybody. So that will be hopefully improving a lot the security by really holding CAs accountable to issuing rogue certificates. Okay? So that's the goal. And it was indeed pushed by Google. I think Google had a lot of awareness of this because of this incident in Iran. So they have been developing this as a solution to the problem. And this is, and it's now in the process of being standardized by the IETF. So there is this RFC, there's a newer internet draft of it, so it's being developed in the IETF. And the basic idea is like this. X509, PKIX, other X509 profiles, provide this accountability. If you have the issuer, then we have accountability. But how do we find this rogue certificate? We cannot expect the relying party to do it. So we are doing this certificate transparency, which introduces 3 new functions to the CA, to the PKI ecosystem. 3 functions, right? This is this triangle here. The functions are logging, monitoring, and auditing. Okay. Loggers doing the logging are entities which provide this public log of all certificates. So every certificate in the CT system would be logged in a log which should be made publicly available. So these loggers are entities whose goal is to keep these logs and to make them publicly available. Monitors are entities whose main job is to monitor the certificates logged to detect any suspect certificates, right? So this may be a domain owner may go to this monitor and say, hey, which certificate did you see with my domain name? Or alert me whenever you see a certificate with my domain name. Or even better, alert me whenever you see any certificate which is similar, potentially misleading to my domain name, okay? So that's a very useful functionality, monitors. Now, notice this second bullet here. Monitors could potentially also help us to detect bad loggers. If there is a logger which does not publish all the certificates, which try to hide some of them, if the logger is cooperating, collaborating with an attacker, then monitor may be able to help us to detect this. And that will be a main subject of today's presentation. The third function of certificate transparency is auditing. And you see here that they also wrote auditors like loggers and monitors, but with a question mark. That is something we'll discuss quite later. Basically, let me first explain what is the auditing function, okay? The auditing function is indeed to check for misbehaving loggers. So exactly what I mentioned before is something that monitors may be involved in. Auditors, that's their main function, to check, detect, deal with misbehaving loggers. Now, why did I say that I called it auditing as a function and not necessarily as an entity? Because in reality, I believe that auditing function will be done only, or at least primarily, by the relying parties. So they are already part of the CI infrastructure, of the PKI infrastructure entities. So it's not a new party if it's the relying party doing it, for example, the browser, right? So while it's kind of nice to have three parties kind of in this nice triangle, this is a picture of this nice triangle, which of course I stole from the early CT publications. But actually, I think that the green circle of auditing will simply be done by the relying party. So I don't think we need a new entity for the auditing function. Of course, when we get to the protocols, you can see yourself and you can make up your own minds if you agree with me or not. Okay, the two other entities, well, the monitoring function is actually provided already. There are some monitors out there. The NCAs, of course, could provide this. Facebook is running one of these monitors. And the loggers are also run by some CAs. And Google also is running one of a big logger function. So both of these are definitely new entities that are required for the certificate transparency mechanism. Okay, I mean, they are serving two very clear functions. One is to maintain these logs, and the other one is to actually go and check whenever the log contains something problematic, something about some domain that the domain owner would want to know about it, some new certificate. Okay, so that's the basic kind of entities that we have in functions we have with certificate transparency. Now let's see a bit the details, right? Okay, first the goals. What are exactly our goals here? The first and obvious goal is that it will be easy to detect and to revoke rogue certificates. That's the basic goal of CT clearly. And from that, we derive that it will be easier to detect and to revoke or distrust any rogue CAs or even negligent CA, right? Any CA which does not actually keep to the standards that we expect from a CA, then, for example, it will allow to issue or cause to issue a lot of rogue certificates, or will detect that it's issuing even a small number of rogue certificates, but intentionally. Clearly, this should not be a CA, right? And basically, the rule is no real accountability without transparency, right? So that's a basic principle, right, of governments. And people sometimes state it a bit differently, but that's probably the right way to do it, to say no accountability without transparency. Now, what about rogue loggers and monitors? Would this property hold for rogue loggers and monitors? And here we have three options, or I will discuss three options. The first option is, no, we just assume the loggers are honest. We don't want to even worry about rogue loggers, right? It's enough for us to worry about rogue CAs. So we just assume that the loggers are trusted. That's an easy mechanism. And you could actually extend it a bit. For example, you could say, I don't trust that all loggers are okay, but I will trust that, I have two loggers and one of the two is okay, right? Some redundancy. And that's essentially what is done by Chrome. I will talk a bit more about that, about what is done by Chrome very soon, but that's essentially the basic idea. Okay, option number two is what I refer to as audit and gossip. Audit and gossip CT, which tries to detect this rogue logger. So that tries to deal with the rogue logger problem. And option three is what I call a no trusted third party, NTTP secure CT, where the monitors and the relying parties detect misbehaving loggers, and the relying party can decide which monitor to rely on, to trust. And that is essentially, in my opinion, the original CT goal. In fact, in the CT documents, it is written there as a goal to avoid assuming any trusted third party. Now, of course, option two is also kind of trying to detect any misbehavior, but it is not really ensuring it. And as we will see, there are some kind of holes there where it may not be able to detect the rogue party. Only option three will really allow us to be sure that we detect any misbehaving entity, in particular any misbehaving loggers. The way I'll present it, this NTTP, the relying party will need to use at least one secure monitor. Actually, we also have a way to improve it further, so the relying party does not even need to use simultaneously multiple monitors, but we'll focus on that. So relying party may need to use or may want to use multiple monitors. The overhead of that is anyway not so large, but then you are completely secure. If one of the monitors you use is secure, then you are secure. Okay, so that is the basic approach. Let me also remind everybody that if you have any questions, please don't wait or just speak up. You can open your mic and just speak. You can use the chat. I'm trying to follow the chat, right? And don't, if there are any questions, don't wait with them. Okay, so I'll begin with the simplest version, which is honest logger CT. And that is, we assume the logger is honest. And that is a pretty simple extension of the regular X509 PKI. We have down the website. Let's look first at the issuing process. We have the website and the CA. The website is asking for a certificate, or the domain is asking for a certificate, sending its public key and the name of the domain. And the CA is issuing, signing the certificate, but before he's returning the certificate, he will send it to the logger to be logged, obviously. And the logger also signs it. He signs the certificate and he signs the timestamp and maybe some serial number and sends all of that to the CA. Now the CA is sending to the website the certificate as well as this SCT. SCT is the signature over the certificate, timestamp, and maybe serial number. It stands for signed certificate timestamp, right? So that's what we have here, exactly. A signature over the certificate and a timestamp. And the logger has been adding it, of course, to the log. By sending the SCT, you get a proof that the certificate proof to the relying party that the certificate will be logged by the logger. The logger is promising to log the certificate. Okay, so that's the first phase of just issuing the certificate. Okay, now before we proceed, let's kind of compare how it would work. This issuing part and the usage by the client party, with the relying party, compared to X509. So here's the process in X509. Certificate authority issues a certificate. When the client is going to the website, client doing the TLS handshake and receiving this SSL certificate. With CT, then the domain is getting a certificate. However, before it gets a certificate, the CA is going and submitting the certificate, receiving the SCT from the logger, and then issuing together the certificate and the SCT which then the client receives in the SSL TLS handshake and can verify that the certificate will be logged. Okay, so that operation is a minor, requiring only a pretty minor extension so far to the operation of the regular X509, but we are ensuring that all certificates are logged. Okay. So that was the issuing process. Now the question is, how do we use these logs to detect any bad certificates? So they are in the log, but how do we know they are there? For that we need to have some entities that will detect the wrong certificates in the logs, and that's exactly the role of the monitors. So the role of the monitor is to detect quickly, without waiting for relying party to detect it, wrong certificates in the log, potentially, hopefully, even before they have been used, even before any customer has fallen victim to this rogue certificate. For that to work, of course, the log must be publicly available, at least to these monitors, which would allow the name owners to monitor the log. Now, they could do it without a monitor. If the log is completely open, then the name owner can go directly to the log. However, this is a lot of overhead to every name owner. You need to go to the log and download all of the names, all of the certificates, just to check for your own domain name. That's a lot of overhead. Of course, it will be a lot of overhead for the logger, right? Because all of these domain owners will come and ask him all the time, give me your certificates. And I mean, that's a lot of overhead. So instead of doing it with this potentially very high overhead and potentially even opening the loggers to denial of service, instead of that, we introduce these new entities which are called monitors, and they can do it. You can do it for many names. And there are already several of these monitors and loggers already operating, and the monitors will download the certificates and then all the new certificates, and then they can ask the logger to give them any recently logged certificates. They can ask the log to give them a range of certificates, as they maintain all of these certificates, allowing a domain owner to check for any new certificates for its own name or any old certificates for a name, and informs the domain owner, which could then ask for if it could detect that anybody has been issuing certificates without authorization, then they can immediately contact the CA, get them revoked, and so on. So the monitors are providing this critical function here, which is really monitoring the logs and detecting any suspect certificates, and therefore also any suspect CA. So that's a basic connection here between the domain owner, the monitor, and the logger. The domain owner tells the monitor, please watch the following domains, and here's some money for you. The monitor is telling the logger, please give me these following certificates, maybe between the following serial numbers, I have until some number, give me the new numbers, and the logger is sending new certificates, and the monitor will detect any new certificates which are either for the same domain or potentially misleading, similar to the domain name, and send them to the domain owner to take action. Okay. And there could be all kind of ways to detect misleading, potentially misleading domain names, of course. Combination, homographic, similar, and so on. Okay. So that's the basic role of the monitors. Let's see how it will work in Honest Logger CT. Very simple, actually. So we have the website, it goes to the monitor, says, please monitor my domain name. And then the website goes and asks for a certificate. Certificate gets logged, gets the logger sends the SCT to the CA, and also it informs the monitor, hey, I have this new certificate. Monitor informs the website or domain owner, hey, there is a new certificate for you. And the domain owner says, oh, that's fine. That's the one I've issued, so everybody's happy. Okay, and what if we actually have an attack? We have a rogue certificate. So if we have a rogue certificate, some attacker, malicious, is asking for a certificate for the same bob.com, for the legitimate domain name, but it's an attacker. So he's sending his own public key. Then the CA is, let's say that the CA has been full, it's not an attacking, but it just did not detect that this is an unauthorized request, so it maybe did not do the validation well enough. Yes, maybe it is done just domain validation, and as we discussed, and as you can see in the CCS paper recently of Haya, it was 2019, I think, you can see how you can get a rogue certificate. You can trick a CA that is doing domain validation into issuing a rogue certificate, and then the logger gets this information, sends back signed, sends back an SCT, everything. Logger cannot know something is wrong here, but it does also inform the monitor. And now that the monitor was informed, he's sending the certificate to informing the website, the domain owner, hey, there is a certificate for your domain name. Is it correct or not? Since in this example it is not, the website will probably contact the CA and get this certificate revoked pronto, right? So it will not be able to cause significant damage. Now we have a question here, a good question. How is the SCT verified? Well, since it is signed, then it is signed by the logger's public key, and the assumption is that everybody, in particular the CA, the website, the domain owner, the subject of the certificate, and also the relying parties, they all know the public key of the logger, so they can simply verify the signature. And the second question is, well, I'm not sure what do you mean how. I mean, if you have the public key and you have a signatures and you apply the signature validation algorithm, and then you know if the signature is valid or not, right? So, oh, the public key of the logger. Yes, the public key of the logger, the assumption is that the relying parties have the public key of the logger similarly to how they are supposed to have the root CA public keys. So you could, of course, ask if we also support a mechanism for having intermediate loggers or whatever that will not be burnt into the browser. And as far as I know, current CT does not support such a mechanism. So all the public keys to validate the loggers should be known to the browser, okay? And about intermediate CAs, well, intermediate CA public keys should be also in the log. I mean, if you, I just don't refer to them, but if you use CT properly, then you should have definitely the public key of the intermediate CA is also in the log. For the same reason that you don't want any possibility of anybody impersonating a CA. Okay, so the problem with all this nice design is the potential of a rogue logger. So because obviously a rogue logger who cooperates with the attacker, they can simply not send this certificate of this rogue certificate, this attacking certificate, right? And then we have a problem because we just don't detect, the monitor doesn't see this attack, and the entire mechanism did not work. Right? So here's a simple case, right? This similar scenario to what we had before, but since the logger is not sending the certificate, I mean, it did send the SCT, so now we have the SCT signing that I'm going to add this to the log. Yes, but actually in reality, he does not send to the monitor this certificate. So now, the monitor cannot know about it and says, oh, there's nothing new, but the attack can succeed. That is obviously the problem with this potential problem with this approach, right? Okay, what can we do about this? So there are three options, I already mentioned them. Option one is, well, either to simply assume the logger is honest or to use redundancy. That is to say, we don't need just one SCT. You need to send me 2 or 3 or whatever the number of SCTs. Now, that is, of course, raising some questions. For example, how many loggers, how many SCTs do you need? And who will be these SCTs? Who will decide who are the loggers that you trust to sign SCTs? What will be the overhead of such mechanism? In practice, currently, Google Chrome is actually supporting this CT, and it requires specifically an SCT from 2 loggers. One of the 2 has to be Google. The other one, Well, the other one could be any other logger. So we need two SCTs, one from Google and one from another logger. Now notice that the other logger is chosen by whom? By the CA. And in this scenario, maybe the CA is attacking itself. So, or negligent or whatever, right? So the bottom line is the attacking website may, or the attacker can choose the CA, obviously. That is part of the problem of having so many CAs. So the attacker is enough for the attacker to find one CA to give him the certificate. So if that one CA is negligent, or even worse, is cooperating with the attacker, they can also choose the other loggers that they use to get the other SCT. And therefore, we have Google and one entity which is chosen potentially by the attacker. Essentially, your trust is in Google, I would say, which is kind of the thing we wanted to avoid, to have trust in one entity. So what, and also, supposing that now there is a second browser manufacturer that tries to adopt the same approach. So that browser manufacturer, they will trust now a different logger. So if I'm a domain owner, I need to get certificates with SCTs from these two CAs. One of them is Google, for the Google browser. And then also with two other or one more CA for a different browser. For every browser, I need to have one logger. So, and how would you find such certificates, and who would do this? So this looks to me like a potential interesting point for people interested in antitrust lawsuits, but that's not our, we'll focus on the technical issue here, okay? So let's look at option number 2, which indeed takes a different approach and does not force you to trust Google specifically or any particular small set of loggers. In option 2, as well as 3, they try to avoid this. Option 2, as I mentioned, audit and gossip. It's a heuristic design whose goal is to detect these rogue loggers. And it roughly follows the RFC as well as the original CT publications. Unfortunately, it's a bit complex, and also it exposes user privacy, and also it is not really provably secure. So these are significant drawbacks, and therefore I will also present option 3, which is a design that I work with the team. We are working on it, NTTP Secure CT, which is whose goal is to ensure that we don't require any trusted third party, and we are ensuring detection of any misbehavior. In fact, not just detection, but we are providing a signed proof of misbehavior, a proof that a certain entity has failed and misbehaved. Okay, so let me talk about the first of the second of these 3 alternatives, the audit and gossip CT. Okay. Now, that essentially is my interpretation of the original CT publication. I believe that is what they had in mind when they discussed audit and gossip as a way to detect rogue loggers. Unfortunately, there isn't a complete specification of this original proposal, so I have to extrapolate a bit, but it does seem to fit the kind of properties claimed in these papers and publications. The basic idea is, again, Merkle tree. So the loggers keep the certificates in a Merkle tree. That is also in the standards right now. The Merkle tree is signed and timestamped. So the digest of the Merkle tree, the digest which is essentially of all the certificates issued, is signed. This digest is called in the standards tree head. Well, because if it's a Merkle tree, then it is like the head of the tree, and then you sign it, so it is STH, signed tree head, with a timestamp too, of course. So it's a signed timestamped tree head, right? I guess there are 2 trees. You could say there are 2 T's there, but it's not written, it's STH. It uses 3 of the Merkle tree, Merkle digest functions. The digest function, the proof of inclusion function, which we discussed already yesterday in regard to revocation, but also the third functionality, which is proof of consistency, which has not always used and not used in, we didn't use it for revocation, but it is used here. And that is a function which allows us to prove that the new digest is a digest of essentially the same tree with some additional new content. Okay, so let me also, I'll kind of briefly remind you or explain about this function of the Merkle digest scheme. Very important scheme, useful in a lot of stuff in crypto. So again, like I mentioned yesterday, I assume that most of you are familiar with Merkle digest schemes, very useful. So basically, these trees, data structures have three functions. One is the digest function. You give it this set block, like a block of messages, a set of messages, and the output is a short digest or like a hash of this block of messages. And we have the proof of inclusion function, which receives a set of messages and some number and gives us a way to prove that a particular message was part of the input to the digest. And then we have the verify proof of inclusion, which exactly checks that checks such a proof. Yes. Okay, so there is here another question which says, how do I get a proof that the certificate is in the Merkle hash tree, right? It's a logger. So when the logger is signing this proof of inclusion, okay, when the logger will, okay, the original SCT sent by the logger does not provide yet this proof. The SCT was just a signature by the logger saying, I am going to add the certificate to the log, right? But now, since the logger has added it to the logger is going to produce also a signature over the SCT and also to provide the proof of inclusion. And I'm going to show soon where this is being sent, and this is going to be some difference between the two variants that we are still discussing, right? The audit and the gossip, and then the no trusted third-party security, okay? So, but then we are going to use exactly this proof of inclusion in order to prove that we have actually added the certificate to the log. That's exactly what we are going to use. Okay, so the verify proof of inclusion is simply getting this proof of inclusion, getting the digest, getting the index number, and then saying, yes, it is in the log, it is in the digest, or no, it's not in the digest. Okay, so that's just verifying it. Now, over these three functions, we already went yesterday, maybe even a bit more in details. I gave also the example of the Merkle tree, which the classical construction of Merkle tree and two-level Merkle tree. The new thing is now the proof of consistency. And that is something that not all implementations of Merkle tree even do this. This is like an additional kind of optional function, if you like. Yeah. And what does it mean for a Merkle digest scheme to support proof of consistency? It means we have two more functions. One which is a proof of consistency function, which is generating this proof of consistency. And the other one is the verify proof of consistency, which is verifying a proof of consistency. So the proof of consistency gets two sequences, BC, B like the current block of messages, and BN for the new block of messages. And the output is this gamma CN, like gamma of both the current and the new, the continuation, the combination of these two blocks of messages, the current one and the new one, which is proof of consistency out of the proof of consistency function given these two blocks. What is it? It's a string, and it's a string which it proves the consistency from one digest, the digest of the current block, to the digest of the combination of the two blocks, this combined block of the combination of the two blocks. Yes. BCN refers to, I guess I should have copied that part too, but BCN was simply defined as the continuation, BC concatenated with BN. That's all, nothing special about BCN. Yeah, I shouldn't, I mean, it's written there, but I didn't cut that part from the text. And the verified proof of consistency gets these two digests, the digest of C, the digest of the first block, and the digest of CN, the digest of the combined current and new block, and the two identifiers telling us, the number of elements in each of these two blocks, and then and finally receiving the proof. This proof, the output of the proof of consistency, and just telling us, yes, this is indeed delta Cn is the continuation of this additional element, or no, it's not true, this is not a continuation. Okay, so that proves us that the new digest is indeed consistent or continues the current digest. So it refers to the same block plus some new addition, new continuation messages. Okay, so that is also something that we will need to use, or that we use in the design of this of certificate transparency with some protection against rogue loggers. Okay, so and a Merkle scheme supports this if proof consistency if it has these two functions, and it has correct proof consistency if whenever you do this correctly, if you give the right input, you take one block, compute the digest, you take some continuation, you compute the digest, and then you compute the proof consistency, you'll definitely get true. That's, of course, the kind of simple case, that correctness hold. And it also ensures security. If what? If the advantage of this attacking game is negligible, I guess I will not go over the game because we not have time, but the game is doing what you would expect. You get these two strings, and if the attacker is able to get these two digests that are not a continuation, that is a success for the attacker. Okay, so how does the protocol work? Okay, so we have now the logger is keeping the certificates in this Merkle tree, and is computing the signed and timestamp digest, signed tree head, and it uses this digest proof inclusion proof consistency function. Okay, we'll see how it goes. Now, in order to do this, and again, I want to remind you that I do think that this protocol and design is not only not ideal, it has its advantages, but also it has the basic disadvantage of being a bit more complex than necessary, right? So you'll have to bear with me. I mean, it's not my design, and I really did the best to try to interpret the original design, and the design that I'm presenting does make sense, right? So I think the original designers did have a reasonable design in their head. It just is not ideal, and it's too complex, and it's not doing things perfectly, but it is still kind of in the right direction. Okay, so bear with me. The final design is actually a bit simpler. Okay, so what the logger has to do, several kind of audit requests support it. So everybody can go to the logger and ask it for the following things. So you can ask for the STH and the proof of inclusion for a given certificate. So, for example, if I got a certificate as a subject, it's a website, I could say, oh, I have this SCT, but now the SCT is a commitment to give me STH and proof of inclusion. Now, after a day has passed, you should give me the STH and proof of inclusion, right? And it also has to support a request for a proof of consistency. So if you give it two STHs, it should give you a proof of consistency. And it, of course, it should give you the current STH, and it should give you the certificates between any start and end time. These are the four functions you need the logger to do. And then there is also one more function that we add now, which is the gossip function. The gossip function is to sharing of STHs between different entities. And that is required to detect a split world attack where the logger is sending different STHs to different entities. And we'll see this in a moment. Okay, So here is an example scenario in which the logger is trying to have a rogue. See, actually, we have an attacker here attacking website, and an attacking CA, and an attacking logger. All of them are trying to attack the poor user. Okay, so the website gets give its public key, the attacker public key, and the name of the website is trying to emulate, so impersonate, and then the logger gets a request for all the STHs. It sends all the STHs, and then let's say it's 6 a.m., right? And then it issues a certificate, sends a SCT for the certificate, and that the website can use for the client to connect. However, now we have the first audit function. So now the client is going to the logger and saying, I want to audit. Give me the STH and give me the proof of inclusion. And then the logger is sending the log and the proof of inclusion to the relying party, showing this is my STH, yes. And when the monitor is coming and asking for it, it's giving him a different STH without this or without these certificates. Okay. Now the client could do the other function, which is the gossip function, sending to the monitor, hey, I got this STH7, is it consistent? Now, since the logger sent it a different STH, maybe with a different time, the monitor has to check if one of them, the STH, if the log tree from our 8 a.m. is a continuation of the one from 7 a.m. So it could go to the logger and ask him, show me continuation. Now, since the logger has been trying to hide this rogue certificate and not to include it in its report, then what can it do? It cannot show a proof of continuation. So then the monitor can say, oh, if the logger cannot prove to me this continuation, the logger must be bad. So in that way, the monitor can detect a bad logger by not being able to provide a proof of consistency between two STHs. Okay. Okay, so that's how it works. That's how it deals with a rogue logger, right? And while I skipped a few details here, but essentially that in that way it could detect a rogue logger. So what is missing here? What is not perfect here? Yeah. First problem is that while we have detected the bad logger, we did not necessarily, or probably, we did not get a proof of the misbehavior of the logger, because the logger simply never sends. There are a few ways in which the logger may prevent providing a proof of misbehavior for itself. It may simply never send the STH for the rogue SCT. So it's like sending the SCT, but when the client is asking, give me the STH, it's just not responding, right? So that client does not get a response. Who cares, right? But definitely you don't have any proof of misbehavior. You just have one client which says, oh, what can I do? I tried to check and there was no response. Or maybe the logger simply does not respond to this request for proof of consistency, right? So here, when the monitor is asking, hey, show me that actually you can get from STH7 to STH8, the logger can simply not respond. By not responding, the monitor may conclude that the logger is bad or some problem, but it cannot have a proof of misbehavior. It cannot even know for sure was it just some random failure or really the logger is attacking, right? So in general, we cannot ensure, this protocol cannot ensure that a bad party, an attacker will get a proof of misbehavior against one of these entities, which is a disadvantage, right? Our goal is that attacks will either be completely ineffective or result in a proof of misbehavior. And of course, we want that there will never be a proof of misbehavior against a honest party, what they call as, the no false proof of misbehavior property. This goal, by the way, we have defined it rigorously, completely and it could be used actually for arbitrary protocols, not just for these protocols. And that's something we define in a framework we are developing, which is called the Modular Security Framework. You can see it in ePrint, and that's what we use to actually analyze the security of these schemes. Okay, so this audit and gossip mechanism also has another problem, which is a privacy problem. The audit process exposes the website visited to the CA. Again, look at the process here. When the relying party is doing the audit, it actually sends the certificate. So the logger sees exactly which website you are visiting, right? So that's also not ideal. We don't want to expose to the CA which website we are visiting. I mean, why should that information be available to the CA? That's, by the way, a similar problem to what we discussed earlier with OCSP, right? But, well, we saw how we can address it in OCSP, but now we address it in OCSP, and now we bring it back in CT, okay? And finally, this audit and gossip protocol mechanism does not ensure revocation status transparency. Now, what does that mean? We don't have transparency of the fact that a particular certificate was revoked or not revoked, right? And that brings us actually a vulnerability to an attack which has, I think, a cute name. Well, I guess I shouldn't say it because I've invented this name, but I like it so much that I will still say it. I really like it. It's a zombie certificate attack, right? Which means that we mislead the relying party into relying on a certificate which was actually revoked, okay? So that's a bad CA, and it's doing this attack. Okay, let's see this attack. It's a zombie certificate attack. So the rogue CA helps the attacker by unrevoking the certificate, right? Resurrecting from the death this certificate. So here is the rogue CA. It gets a request, please, revoke my key because I think my key was exposed, right? So here's this website. It got a certificate, and now the key was exposed to the attacker. And the website somehow suspects the key was exposed, so it's telling the CA, please revoke my key. Okay, I revoked your key. That's what the CA is saying. But who knows if it really revoked the key or not, right? There is nothing in CT which is actually validating that the key was revoked. So now when a client, now we have some client which is not under attack, is asking for the CRL, and it gets a correct response identifying this certificate was revoked. But now we have the victim. The victim asks for the CRL and gets back, oh, no, it was not revoked. Nothing was revoked. And then, of course, it will continue the connection with the attacker and fall victim to the attack, okay? So that attack is working. Actually, you can do it for CRL, for OCSP, doesn't matter. And it works for X509 and as well as for the honest logger CT, as well as the audit and gossip CT. But however, it will be part of what we are going to prevent with the NTTP secure CT, because this protocol will also ensure revocation status transparency, not just the certificate transparency, but also transparency of the status of whether a certificate was revoked or non-revoked. Okay. Okay, so let's see this variant quickly. I know that we are running out of time. Okay, so NTTP, no trusted third party. Secure against collusion of any set of parties, including any set of loggers, up to a threshold T of parties, maximum number of colluding parties. Okay. As we can set this T, and actually the protocol is really efficient even with high T, as you will see. It's not that the T is problematic from a performance point of view. Okay, the goal, if we have a rogue, if the attacker is issuing or getting issued a rogue certificate, then we will detect the rogue party and attacker, okay? And for that, the monitors will issue a proof of misbehavior when the rogue certificate is audited, yes, or maybe even earlier. So that is if the certificate is omitted from the log or an invalid certificate in the log, then the monitors will detect this. Okay. Also the zombie certificates that we mentioned before, and all the revoked and then recirculated certificate, also monitor will detect and issue proof of misbehavior. So any attack like this, if the logger is trying to do it with a CA, etc., this will be detected and proved in a way that everybody will know that this party has been cheating. Okay. So, and of course, we ensure no false proof of misbehavior. So a honest party is never considered corrupt. That's, as I said, a property which should exist in basically any protocol with a proof of misbehavior. And proof of misbehavior in general is something we should see in a lot of protocols. This is a very useful security mechanism. So some simplifications and assumptions of this protocol, which mostly you can pretty easily get rid of all of them, but to simplify. So first of all, reliable communication between the entities, assume reliable communication, assume synchronous clocks. We ignored the delays, we ignored the clock's use. It's really easy to handle these details, but of course we'll not do it. And assume that we have at least 2 T+1 monitors where T was the threshold of the faulty parties, so we have a majority of non-faulty monitors. And all monitors, for simplicity, assume that all monitors observe all the loggers. Okay, so now the issue process of the protocol, it is pretty similar to before, but for simplicity, the main difference is that we always send back, the logger always send back the STH. We together with the proof of inclusion. So we skip the SCT stage. We always, the logger is always generating a new STH and sending it back, which means that in order not to issue an STH every minute, then the logger is committed to some period of time between STH and STH. Let's say, just for simplicity, it's easy to think of it as a 24-hour period, like a day. And if you issue a new certificate, it will take you a day until you get back the STH and proof of inclusion, and only then you can give the new certificate to the subject. Now, there are ways to get rid of this and get things to be done quicker, but that just introduces additional complexity. And frankly, I don't think this in practice this should be a big issue. But again, if it is, then it is possible to extend the protocol to support this kind of SCT mechanism in addition to what I described. But let's focus on the simple case. So the logger is issuing after these 24 hours. The logger is making a new tree head, continuing the previous one, and sending the signed tree head to the CA together with this proof of inclusion showing that the particular certificate appears in the tree. Okay, and then the CA just provides this certificate, proof inclusion, and STH to the subject. And the subject then just send it to the relying party upon the TLS connection, as usual. Okay, so that's the issue and the sending to the relying party. Let's focus on some minor details here. In this third phase, we see that the logger sends this at the end of the day, this proof of inclusion and the digest, the tree head signed, however, signed by, so there's a signed tree head, signed by the logger. And at least the relying party has to validate the certificate as well as validate the STH, including the date in the STH, and to validate the proof of inclusion, of course. And this figure and most of my description will not include the details for the revocation status transparency, because we don't have time, but these details, I guess I'll have to skip. Okay, in the no-fault scenarios, this works very simply. The website is getting we get the certificate. At the end of the day, we get back the STH, in the certificate, the STH and the proof of inclusion. And when we connect to the client, we give the data. And now at the very end, notice here what we add here is that the client is going and doing a monitoring of the STH. And then the monitor says, hey, yeah, that's exactly the STH which I received. So everybody is happy. And the monitor can reply to the client, sign, yes, the audit was okay, and sign this STH. So yes, client knows everything is okay. Now, if we look at the omitted certificate attack, where the monitor did not, the logger did not send some certificate, then here, if we look at this attack and now see what will happen here, so in this scenario, the audit attack will detect this omitted certificate. Because in the omitted certificate attack now, the logger is sending this proof inclusion and the STH. This must include the rogue certificate. But if it tries not to show this rogue certificate to the logger, so send the certificates without this malicious certificate to the logger, then it cannot have the same STH, and therefore the monitor will immediately detect it, and then they get this proof of misbehavior, which is just a pair of the two conflicting STHs, both signed by the monitor. Okay, so that's essentially this process here, where the client is doing an audit to the STH, and the monitor is sending the proof of misbehavior for the two STHs. Maybe, okay, I guess I should mention here that the monitor may have only already an updated version of the STH, because maybe the client here, it took him a lot of time to get the STH and to do this audit. But that's not a problem, because whenever the monitor receives a new STH, it receives it with a proof of continuation, with consistency from the previous STH, and also monitor simply keep all the STHs in order to be able to check the STH for correctness and to have the proof of misbehavior if the two STHs are different. Okay, if we don't have gossip, then we still could have an attack here, a split world attack, where the logger is giving different information to two different monitors. So if the logger could somehow anticipate that Alice will be using one monitor and the website is using a different monitor, then it could try to still keep this split world attack. But that is easily prevented by having this gossip between the two different monitors, which detects immediately if the logger has been sending different STHs, and again giving us a signed proof of misbehavior or two conflicting signatures by the logger. So we easily detect any misbehaving logger. And it's done, immediately after we get the STH. So that concludes my presentation. In general, I would say that after many years, the PKI has been very, very stable. Now we see a lot of efforts to try to improve PKI, improve the revocation mechanism. There are several proposals on how do we do this, and either stapled or prefetched, but both of them without any online communication to the CA, both for privacy and efficiency. And these proposals are also focused on being very efficient to computation and communication-wise. And we have the certificate and certificate status transparency to detect rogue loggers for the domain, same or misleading domain names, and this property of NTTP, no trust as third party. If you have any rogue certificate, it means a rogue party, an attacking party, will be detected and proven attacking. And of course, no false convictions, no false proof of misbehavior. Some details I did not cover here, in particular, the prevention and detection of equivocation, that's beyond what we are doing here, and detection and proof of security, which I mentioned. Okay, thank you very much. If there's any questions, you can, I guess, ask me now or later.